The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Lincoln Elementary School in Portland, Oregon, casting long shadows across the hallway where 9-year-old Ryan sat alone on a worn wooden bench outside the music room. His backpack rested beside him, decorated with colorful patches his mother had sewn on to make it special. Ryan had Down syndrome, a fact that seemed to define him in the eyes of most people at school, though his parents had always taught him that he was so much more than a diagnosis. His round face held an expression of quiet determination mixed with uncertainty as he listened to the sounds of piano scales drifting from behind the closed door. Inside that music room, Mrs. Henderson was teaching her regular piano students, children who had been taking lessons for years. Their fingers danced across the keys with practiced precision, filling the air with melodies that sounded effortless. Ryan had been listening to these sounds for months, ever since his mother had started working as a teaching assistant at the school. Every Tuesday and Thursday, he would wait for her on that same bench, and every time he became mesmerized by the music flowing from that room. He would close his eyes and imagine his own hands creating those beautiful sounds, his fingers knowing exactly which keys to press, his heart guiding the melody. But the reality of Ryan's life was far different from his musical dreams. At school, he was enrolled in the special education program, separated from most of the other children. During lunch, he often sat at the end of a table while other kids whispered and pointed. They never said cruel things directly to his face, but their actions spoke volumes. When teams were chosen for games during recess, Ryan was always picked last and sometimes not picked at all. Teachers would speak to him slowly, over-enunciating every word as if he couldn't understand normal speech. Even well-meaning adults treated him differently, their voices taking on a particular tone reserved for those they perceived as less capable. Ryan's mother, Jennifer, had noticed how music affected her son from the time he was very young. When other toddlers were drawn to toys and cartoons, Ryan would stop everything he was doing when music played. His face would light up with pure joy and he would sway back and forth, completely absorbed in the sounds. As he grew older, this love only intensified. He would hum constantly, creating his own melodies that seemed to come from somewhere deep within him. Jennifer had always believed that Ryan had a special connection to music, something that went beyond typical appreciation. One afternoon, during a parent-teacher conference, Jennifer had mentioned Ryan's love of music to his special education teacher, Miss Patterson. The teacher had smiled politely and nodded, but Jennifer could see the doubt in her eyes. Miss Patterson had been kind but realistic, explaining that children with Down syndrome often had interests and passions just like any other child, but that parents needed to be careful about setting expectations too high. She suggested that Ryan might enjoy music as a listener, perhaps attending concerts or listening to recordings at home, but cautioned against pursuing formal instruction. The conversation had left Jennifer feeling deflated, yet a stubborn part of her refused to give up on her son's dream. Ryan's father, Michael, had been more skeptical than Jennifer about the whole thing. He loved his son deeply and wanted nothing but happiness for him, but he also wanted to protect Ryan from disappointment and failure. Michael had seen how the world treated his son, how people underestimated him at every turn, and he worried that pursuing something as complex as piano would only lead to heartbreak. During dinner conversations, when Jennifer would bring up the idea of piano lessons for Ryan, Michael would gently redirect the conversation, suggesting other activities that might be more suitable, more realistic, more within reach. The music room door opened suddenly, breaking Ryan from his thoughts. A group of students filed out, chattering excitedly about their progress and upcoming recital pieces. They walked past Ryan without acknowledging him, their voices bouncing off the hallway walls. One girl, a fourth grader named Sophie who was known for her exceptional piano skills, glanced at Ryan and then quickly looked away, whispering something to her friend that made them both giggle. Ryan felt the familiar sting of being invisible, of being seen as someone who didn't quite belong in their world. Mrs. Henderson appeared in the doorway, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, her reading glasses hanging from a beaded chain around her neck. She was a woman in her early 60s who had been teaching piano for over 30 years. She had a reputation for being strict but fair, demanding excellence from her students while also nurturing their love of music. She spotted Ryan on the bench and offered him a brief smile before turning to lock up the music room. Jennifer emerged from the classroom down the hall where she had been helping grade papers, and she walked toward her son with the kind of tired smile that comes at the end of a long day. That evening at home, Ryan sat at the kitchen table doing his homework while Jennifer prepared dinner. The small house they lived in was filled with warmth despite its modest size. Family photos covered the walls, documenting Ryan's life from infancy through his current 9 years. There were pictures of him at the beach, at birthday parties, at Special Olympics events where he had participated in track and field. Each photo captured genuine moments of joy, times when Ryan was simply being himself without the weight of others' judgments. After dinner, Ryan retreated to his room and pulled out a piece of cardboard he had hidden under his bed. On it, he had drawn piano keys with a black marker, carefully counting out the pattern of black and white keys he had observed through the music room window. The drawing was remarkably accurate, showing that Ryan had been paying close attention. He placed the cardboard on his desk and began to press the drawn keys with his fingers, humming a melody he had heard earlier that day. His fingers moved with surprising coordination, following patterns that seemed to make sense to him even though he had never touched a real piano. Jennifer happened to walk past his room and saw him through the partially open door. Her heart swelled with a mixture of pride and sadness. She stood there for a long moment, watching her son practice on an imaginary piano, his face completely focused and content. This was not just a passing interest or a casual hobby. This was something deeper, something that called to Ryan in a way that nothing else did. She thought about Miss Patterson's words of caution, about Michael's concerns, about the practical difficulties of finding a piano teacher who would be willing to work with a child with Down syndrome. But as she watched Ryan's fingers dance across those hand-drawn keys, as she heard him humming with perfect pitch, Jennifer made a decision. She would find a way to get Ryan real piano lessons, no matter what obstacles stood in their way. She had spent years advocating for her son in schools, in doctors' offices, in a world that too often saw his diagnosis before it saw him. This would be no different. If Ryan wanted to play the piano, then she would move heaven and earth to make it happen. The next morning, Jennifer began making phone calls during her lunch break at school. She contacted every piano teacher listed in the local directory, explaining her situation and asking if they would be willing to teach a 9-year-old boy with Down syndrome. The responses were varied but mostly discouraging. Some teachers were honest, saying they didn't have experience with special needs students and didn't feel qualified. Others made polite excuses about full schedules. A few were kind but firm, explaining that piano required a level of cognitive ability and fine motor control that might be challenging for a child with Down syndrome. After a dozen rejections, Jennifer felt her determination wavering. She sat in the teacher's lounge, staring at her list of crossed-out names, fighting back tears of frustration. It seemed that the world was once again telling her that her son's dreams were too big, too unrealistic, too much to ask for. She thought about going home and telling Ryan that piano lessons just weren't possible right now, that maybe they could try again when he was older, knowing full well that older would never come, that this opportunity would slip away if she didn't seize it now. Just as she was about to give up for the day, she remembered Mrs. Henderson. The school's piano teacher had always been professional and polite, but Jennifer had never really had a substantial conversation with her. What did she have to lose by asking? The worst that could happen was another rejection, and she had already received plenty of those. Jennifer walked down the hallway to the music room, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and dread. Mrs. Henderson was organizing sheet music when Jennifer knocked on the door frame. The older woman looked up, her expression neutral but not unwelcoming. Jennifer took a deep breath and launched into her request, explaining Ryan's love of music, his dedication to his cardboard piano, his perfect pitch when he hummed melodies. She tried to keep her voice steady, tried not to sound desperate, but as she spoke, emotion crept in. She found herself talking about how Ryan faced rejection and dismissal every day of his life, how he deserved a chance to pursue something that brought him joy, how she believed that music could give him confidence and purpose. Mrs. Henderson listened without interrupting, her face revealing nothing of her thoughts. When Jennifer finally finished speaking, there was a long silence that felt like an eternity. The piano teacher walked over to the window, looking out at the playground where children were running and playing during recess. Jennifer held her breath, preparing herself for another polite rejection, already thinking of what words she would use to soften the disappointment for Ryan. Finally, Mrs. Henderson turned around and spoke. Her voice was measured and serious, but there was something in her eyes that Jennifer couldn't quite read. She said that she had never taught a student with Down syndrome before, and she wanted to be honest about that. She explained that piano required discipline, focus, and countless hours of practice, and that she couldn't make any promises about what Ryan might be able to achieve. But then she added something that made Jennifer's heart leap. She said that she had been teaching piano for 3 decades, and in all that time, what she had learned was that true musical ability wasn't about perfect technique or flawless performances. It was about the connection between the heart and the music, about the courage to express oneself through sound. Mrs. Henderson proposed a trial period. She would give Ryan 4 lessons, 1 per week, to see if he had the foundation necessary to continue. She wouldn't charge for these initial lessons because she wanted to approach this as an experiment, a learning experience for both of them. If after 4 weeks Ryan showed genuine aptitude and continued interest, they would discuss moving forward with regular paid lessons. If it became clear that piano wasn't the right fit, they would part ways with no hard feelings and no money wasted. Jennifer felt tears streaming down her face before she even realized she was crying. She thanked Mrs. Henderson repeatedly, promising that Ryan would work hard and take the lessons seriously. The piano teacher raised her hand gently, stopping the flow of gratitude. She explained that she wasn't doing this out of charity or pity. She was doing it because she believed that every person who truly loves music deserves a chance to explore that love. She had seen Ryan sitting on that bench week after week, his face pressed against the music room window, his eyes tracking the movement of her students' fingers on the keys. That kind of dedication and interest couldn't be ignored. That evening, Jennifer could barely contain her excitement as she waited for Michael to come home from work. When he walked through the door, she immediately told him about the arrangement with Mrs. Henderson. Michael's reaction was more subdued than she had hoped. He was happy that Ryan would get a chance to try, but he was also worried about what would happen if the lessons didn't work out. He didn't want to see his son get his hopes up only to have them crushed. Jennifer understood his concerns, but she also felt strongly that protecting Ryan from potential disappointment wasn't the same as protecting him from life itself. They decided together that they would tell Ryan about the lessons but would frame it carefully. They would explain that this was a trial period, a chance to see if piano was something he really wanted to pursue. They would emphasize the hard work involved and make sure he understood that playing piano wasn't just about wanting to do it, it required dedication and practice. They sat Ryan down after dinner and shared the news. The transformation in Ryan's face was instantaneous and complete. His eyes widened with disbelief, then filled with tears of pure joy. He couldn't seem to find words adequate to express what he was feeling, so he simply threw his arms around both of his parents, hugging them with all the strength in his small body. In that moment, Michael's doubts melted away. Whatever happened with these piano lessons, however things turned out, seeing his son this happy made it all worthwhile. The days leading up to Ryan's first lesson felt like an eternity for the excited boy. He continued practicing on his cardboard piano with renewed energy, his humming filling the house from morning until night. Jennifer noticed that he was more focused on his schoolwork, more engaged during dinner conversations, more confident in his interactions with others. It was as if having something to look forward to, having a dream that was actually within reach, had changed something fundamental in him. On the morning of the first lesson, Ryan woke up before his alarm clock. He dressed carefully in his favorite shirt, the blue one with buttons that he had learned to fasten himself after months of practice. He ate his breakfast quickly and then waited by the door with his new notebook that Jennifer had bought for him to use for piano notes and practice assignments. Jennifer had taken the afternoon off work specifically for this occasion, wanting to be there for Ryan's first lesson. They arrived at the music room 15 minutes early. Ryan's excitement was palpable, but underneath it, Jennifer could sense nervousness as well. She squeezed his hand reassuringly as they waited on the familiar bench. When Mrs. Henderson opened the door and invited them inside, Ryan's eyes grew wide as he took in the room properly for the first time. The upright piano stood against one wall, its dark wood polished to a shine. Music posters decorated the walls, showing composers from different eras and genres. A metronome sat on a shelf alongside books of sheet music organized by difficulty level. Mrs. Henderson gestured for Ryan to sit on the piano bench. He approached it slowly, almost reverently, as if he couldn't quite believe this was really happening. He sat down and looked at the keys, real keys, not drawn with marker on cardboard. His fingers hovered above them, trembling slightly with anticipation and uncertainty. Mrs. Henderson pulled up a chair beside the piano bench and sat down at Ryan's level. She didn't speak immediately, instead allowing the boy to take in the moment, to absorb the reality of sitting in front of an actual piano for the first time in his life. Jennifer stood near the door, her hands clasped tightly together, hardly daring to breathe. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating dust particles that danced in the air like tiny stars, and in that quiet music room, everything felt suspended in time. Finally, Mrs. Henderson spoke in a calm, clear voice that held no trace of the condescension Ryan had become so accustomed to hearing from adults. She asked him if he knew anything about the piano, about how it worked, about the sounds it could make. Ryan nodded enthusiastically and began to explain in his own way, his words sometimes tumbling over each other in his excitement, about how the white keys and black keys made different sounds, about how pressing them down created music, about how some sounds were high and some were low. His explanation wasn't perfect or technical, but it showed genuine understanding and observation. Mrs. Henderson listened attentively to every word, nodding as Ryan spoke, treating his observations with the same respect she would give any student. When he finished, she placed her own hands on the keys and began to play a simple ascending scale. The notes rang out pure and clear in the small room, each one distinct yet connected to the next, creating a pattern that seemed almost mathematical in its perfection. Ryan's face lit up with wonder, and without being asked, he began to hum along, matching the pitch of each note with remarkable accuracy. The piano teacher's eyebrows raised slightly, the first sign of surprise Jennifer had seen on her composed face. Mrs. Henderson played the scale again, this time starting from a different note, and once more Ryan hummed along perfectly. She played a simple melody, just a few notes in sequence, and asked Ryan to repeat what he heard. He hummed it back to her without hesitation, every note correct, every interval precise. Mrs. Henderson played a slightly more complex pattern, and again Ryan reproduced it flawlessly with his voice. Jennifer watched this exchange with growing amazement. She had always known her son had a good ear for music, but she had never realized quite how developed his pitch recognition was. Mrs. Henderson sat back in her chair, studying Ryan with new interest. She explained to him that what he had was called perfect pitch, an ability that many musicians spent years trying to develop, and some never achieved at all. Ryan didn't fully understand the significance of what she was saying, but he understood enough to know it was something good, something special about him. The teacher then took Ryan's right hand gently and positioned it over the keys, showing him how to curve his fingers slightly, how to let them rest naturally on the white keys. She explained about finger numbers, how the thumb was number 1, the index finger was number 2, and so on through to the pinky being number 5. She had him practice simply placing his fingers on the keys without pressing down, getting used to the feel of the smooth ivory beneath his fingertips, learning the proper hand position. Ryan followed her instructions carefully, his face scrunched up in concentration. His fingers didn't curve quite as easily as those of her other students, the muscle tone differences that came with Down syndrome making the precise positioning more challenging. But he persisted, adjusting and readjusting until Mrs. Henderson nodded her approval. She then showed him how to press down a single key, demonstrating the motion that came from the finger itself rather than the whole hand, explaining how control and gentleness created better sound than force. She had Ryan play middle C, just that one note, over and over again. She asked him to play it softly, then a bit louder, then softly again. She had him use different fingers to press the same key, getting used to the feel of each finger's strength and independence. What might have seemed tedious to another child held Ryan's complete attention. Each time that single note rang out, his face showed satisfaction and joy. This wasn't just an exercise to him. This was music, real music that he was creating with his own hands. After working on that single note for nearly 10 minutes, Mrs. Henderson introduced a second note, the D right next to middle C. She showed Ryan how to move from one finger to the next, from one note to the next, creating the tiniest fragment of a melody. She played the two notes together, C and then D, and asked Ryan to copy her. His first attempt was clumsy, his fingers not quite hitting the keys squarely, but the notes came out. He tried again, and this time it was smoother. By the fifth attempt, he was moving between the two notes with growing confidence. The lesson continued in this methodical way, with Mrs. Henderson introducing concepts slowly and clearly, never rushing, never showing impatience when Ryan needed something repeated or demonstrated again. She added a third note, then a fourth, building a simple 5-note pattern that Ryan practiced over and over. Jennifer noticed that Mrs. Henderson's teaching style with Ryan wasn't dramatically different from how she might teach any beginner, but there was a careful attention to pacing, a willingness to spend extra time on foundational concepts, and most importantly, a complete absence of lowered expectations. About 30 minutes into the lesson, Mrs. Henderson did something that surprised both Jennifer and Ryan. She took out a piece of beginner sheet music, a very simple exercise book designed for young children just starting piano. She opened it to the first page, which showed whole notes on a staff, and began to explain the basics of musical notation. She pointed to the lines and spaces, explaining how each one represented a different note, how the position of the note on the staff told you which key to play. Ryan stared at the page with intense focus, his eyes tracking her finger as she pointed to each element. Jennifer had worried that reading music might be too abstract, too difficult for Ryan to grasp, but as Mrs. Henderson explained the connection between the written notes and the piano keys, something seemed to click in his understanding. She showed him how the note on the bottom line of the treble clef was E, and she had him find E on the piano. Then she showed him how the note in the space right above it was F, and he found that key as well. They spent the remaining portion of the lesson going back and forth between the written music and the piano keys, with Mrs. Henderson having Ryan identify notes on the page and then find them on the keyboard. It was slow work, and Ryan made plenty of mistakes, but he never became frustrated or discouraged. Instead, each time he correctly matched a written note to the right piano key, he beamed with pride, looking over at his mother as if to say, "See, I can do this." As the hour drew to a close, Mrs. Henderson gave Ryan his first assignment. She asked him to practice the five-note pattern they had worked on, playing it forward and backward with each hand separately. She also wanted him to practice identifying the notes they had learned on the staff, tracing them with his finger in the exercise book she was lending him. She wrote down the practice instructions in clear, simple language, and she went over them with both Ryan and Jennifer to make sure they understood exactly what needed to be done. Before they left, Mrs. Henderson addressed Ryan directly, looking him in the eyes with an expression of seriousness and respect. She told him that learning piano was not easy, that it would require practice every single day, that there would be times when he felt frustrated or wanted to give up. She asked him if he was truly committed to this, if he understood what he was taking on. Ryan nodded vigorously, his voice firm as he promised that he would practice every day, that he would work as hard as he needed to, that playing piano was what he wanted more than anything. The drive home was filled with Ryan's excited chatter. He talked nonstop about the lesson, about the feel of the real keys under his fingers, about the sounds he had made, about the music notes on the page that told him what to play. Jennifer listened with a full heart, occasionally glancing at her son in the rearview mirror, seeing an expression of pure happiness and purpose that she wished she could bottle and keep forever. When Michael came home from work that evening, Ryan rushed to tell him everything about the lesson, demonstrating his hand position in the air, humming the five-note pattern he had learned. Michael listened with genuine interest, asking questions and encouraging his son, though Jennifer could still see traces of concern in her husband's eyes. After Ryan went to bed, Michael and Jennifer talked in the living room about how the lesson had gone, about Mrs. Henderson's observations, about Ryan's unexpected perfect pitch. Michael admitted that he had been wrong to be so skeptical, that seeing Ryan this motivated and engaged was remarkable. But he also voiced his ongoing worry about what would happen at the end of the 4-week trial period if Mrs. Henderson decided that Ryan couldn't continue. Jennifer shared his concern, but felt more optimistic after witnessing the lesson. She had seen something in the piano teacher's face, a growing interest and investment that suggested this might become more than just a trial arrangement. The next morning before school, Ryan asked if he could practice his piano exercise. The family didn't own a piano, a fact that Jennifer had been trying not to think about too much. She had hoped that if the lessons worked out, they might be able to find a used keyboard or save up for an inexpensive digital piano. In the meantime, she had a temporary solution. She sat with Ryan at the kitchen table and helped him lay out his cardboard piano. Using a marker, she added the 5 notes he needed to practice, labeling them according to what Mrs. Henderson had taught him. Ryan practiced on his makeshift keyboard for 20 minutes before school, his fingers pressing down on the drawn keys, his voice humming the notes as he played. It wasn't ideal, and Jennifer's heart ached watching him make music on cardboard when he deserved a real instrument. But Ryan didn't seem to mind at all. He was focused and determined, counting out his repetitions, working through the pattern forward and backward just as Mrs. Henderson had instructed. This became their morning routine. Every day before school, Ryan would practice on his cardboard piano. Jennifer would sit with him, helping him stay focused, praising his progress, occasionally correcting his finger positions based on what she remembered from the lesson. She also began researching pianos and keyboards online during her breaks at work, trying to figure out what they could afford and when they might be able to purchase one. At school, Ryan seemed different. Other students and teachers noticed a change in him, though they couldn't quite identify what it was. He walked with his head held a bit higher. During his special education classes, he was more engaged and participatory. At lunch, when the usual whispers and giggles started from nearby tables, Ryan seemed less affected by them, as if he had found something within himself that their mockery couldn't touch. He had a purpose now, something that was his own, something that made him feel capable and special. Miss Patterson, his special education teacher, mentioned the change to Jennifer one afternoon. She said that Ryan had been talking about his piano lessons constantly, telling anyone who would listen about the notes he was learning and the music he was making. Miss Patterson seemed genuinely pleased by this development, though Jennifer detected a hint of surprise in her voice, as if she hadn't quite believed that the piano lessons would actually happen or would have such a positive effect. The second lesson arrived, and once again Ryan woke up early, eager and prepared. This time, Mrs. Henderson started by having him demonstrate what he had practiced during the week. She listened carefully as he played his 5-note pattern on the real piano, his cardboard practice having translated remarkably well to the actual instrument. She made small corrections to his hand position and finger movements, but overall, she seemed satisfied with his progress. During this lesson, Mrs. Henderson introduced the concept of rhythm. She explained how music wasn't just about playing the right notes, but also about playing them at the right time, holding them for the right duration. She demonstrated with simple clapping exercises, having Ryan clap back rhythms that she created. His responses were quick and accurate, his natural musicality showing through once again. She then transferred this concept to the piano, showing him how to count beats while playing, how to keep steady time. Ryan struggled more with this aspect than he had with pitch. Coordinating his counting with his finger movements proved challenging, and for the first time, Jennifer saw frustration flicker across his face. He would start out keeping good time, but then his counting would speed up or slow down, throwing off the rhythm. Mrs. Henderson remained patient, breaking the exercise down into smaller parts, having him count out loud without playing, then play without counting, then gradually combine the two skills. By the end of the lesson, Ryan still hadn't mastered the rhythmic exercise, and Jennifer could see that this bothered him. Mrs. Henderson must have noticed as well because she knelt down beside the piano bench and spoke directly to Ryan. She told him that every musician, every single one, had aspects of music that came easily and aspects that required more work. She explained that struggling with something didn't mean you couldn't learn it or that you weren't good enough. It simply meant you had to practice more, be patient with yourself, and trust the process. Her words seemed to comfort Ryan, and his expression shifted from frustration back to determination. Mrs. Henderson assigned him practice exercises for the week, focusing heavily on rhythm work in addition to continuing his note exercises. She also introduced 3 new notes, expanding his range on the keyboard. As they left the lesson, Ryan was quieter than he had been the previous week, more thoughtful, processing the reality that piano was going to challenge him in ways he hadn't anticipated. That week of practice was harder than the first. The rhythm exercises required a level of concentration that tired Ryan out quickly. There were moments when he wanted to stop, when the frustration would build up and Jennifer could see him fighting back tears. During these moments, she would remind him of Mrs. Henderson's words, would encourage him to take a break and come back to it, would celebrate the small improvements even when the overall goal still seemed out of reach. Michael started joining these practice sessions when he got home from work. He would sit at the table with Ryan, clapping out rhythms, counting beats, making a game of the exercises. His involvement made a difference, turning the difficult practice into family time, showing Ryan that his parents believed in him and were willing to invest their own time and energy into his dream. Slowly, incrementally, Ryan's rhythm began to improve. At school, word had spread about Ryan's piano lessons. Some of the students who took lessons with Mrs. Henderson had seen him in the music room and they had talked about it with their friends. The reactions were mixed. Some kids were curious, asking Ryan questions about what he was learning. Others were dismissive, making comments about how piano was too hard for someone like him, how he would never be able to play real music. A few were outright cruel, mocking his attempts to learn, questioning why Mrs. Henderson would waste her time teaching him. One particularly difficult day, Ryan came home from school with red eyes, clearly having cried. Jennifer asked what happened, and after some gentle prodding, Ryan explained that during recess, a group of older boys had surrounded him, asking him to play something on an imaginary piano. When he had tried to ignore them, they had laughed and said that even if he had a real piano, he would never be able to play it properly, that kids like him weren't smart enough for music. Jennifer felt a surge of protective anger, wanting to march back to that school and confront those children and their parents. But she also knew that shielding Ryan from every cruel comment and ignorant remark wasn't possible or even helpful in the long run. Instead, she sat with her son and talked about how some people didn't understand, how they judged others without knowing anything about them, how their words said more about their own limitations than about Ryan's abilities. She reminded him of what Mrs. Henderson had said about every musician having to work hard, having to practice, having to overcome challenges. Ryan listened to his mother's words, and then he said something that surprised her. He said that he didn't care what those boys thought because he knew something they didn't know. He knew how it felt to play a piano, to make real music with his own hands. He knew that Mrs. Henderson believed in him, that his parents supported him, and that he was learning something difficult and doing it well. Their mean words couldn't take away what he had accomplished or what he was going to accomplish. Jennifer hugged her son tightly, amazed at the resilience and wisdom he was developing. The piano lessons were teaching him more than just music. They were teaching him about perseverance, about self-worth, about not allowing others to define his capabilities. She realized that no matter what happened with these lessons, whether Ryan became an accomplished pianist or not, this experience was shaping him in profoundly positive ways. The third lesson brought new challenges and new breakthroughs. Mrs. Henderson introduced Ryan to playing with both hands together, a coordination skill that many beginning students found difficult. She started with the simplest possible exercise, having his left hand play one note repeatedly while his right hand played a different note at the same time. Ryan's face scrunched up in concentration as he tried to make his hands work independently, each doing its own task while remaining coordinated with the other. His first attempts were chaotic, with both hands either playing at the same time or getting completely out of sync. But Mrs. Henderson broke it down into tiny steps, having him practice each hand separately until the patterns were automatic, then slowly combining them. After considerable effort and numerous attempts, Ryan managed to play several measures with both hands working together. The look of triumph on his face when he succeeded was radiant. Jennifer noticed during this lesson that Mrs. Henderson's demeanor toward Ryan had shifted subtly. In the first lesson, the teacher had been professional and patient but somewhat reserved, as if she was still evaluating whether this arrangement would work. By the third lesson, there was a warmth in her interactions with Ryan, a genuine investment in his progress. She smiled more readily at his successes and showed real enthusiasm when he grasped a difficult concept. Near the end of the lesson, Mrs. Henderson did something unexpected. She pulled out a piece of actual music, not just an exercise but a simple children's song arranged for very beginning pianists. It was only 8 measures long, using just the notes Ryan had learned, with a basic rhythm pattern. She played it through for him first, and the simple melody filled the room, recognizable and pleasant. Ryan's eyes widened as he realized this was real music, an actual song, not just scales and exercises. Mrs. Henderson explained that if Ryan practiced diligently during the coming week, working through the exercises she assigned, he would learn this piece and potentially be able to play it all the way through by the next lesson. She told him that this would be his first real accomplishment as a pianist, his first complete musical piece. Ryan held the sheet music carefully, as if it were something precious and fragile, his fingers tracing the notes on the page. As they walked to the car after the lesson, Ryan clutched the sheet music to his chest and announced to his mother that he was going to practice extra hard this week, because he wanted to learn that song perfectly. Jennifer's heart swelled with pride and love, but underneath those feelings lurked a growing worry. The 4-week trial period was almost over. The next lesson would be the final one before Mrs. Henderson made her decision about whether to continue teaching Ryan. That evening, Jennifer couldn't stop thinking about the approaching end of the trial period. She had seen how much these piano lessons meant to Ryan, how they had transformed not just his skills but his entire sense of self-worth and possibility. The thought of having to tell him that the lessons were ending, that Mrs. Henderson had decided not to continue, filled her with dread. She tried to push these worries aside and focus on supporting Ryan's practice, but the uncertainty gnawed at her constantly. Ryan threw himself into practicing with unprecedented intensity. Every morning before school, he spent 30 minutes at the kitchen table with his cardboard piano, working through his exercises and the new song. Every evening after dinner, he practiced again, sometimes for an hour or more. Michael had downloaded a free piano app on an old tablet they had, which allowed Ryan to hear the actual notes as he practiced, making the experience more realistic than the silent cardboard keys. Jennifer watched her son's dedication with a mixture of admiration and heartbreak. She had started setting aside money from each paycheck, hoping to eventually buy a keyboard, but the funds were accumulating slowly. Every dollar counted in their household, and large purchases required careful planning and sacrifice. She had found a used digital piano online for $300, a price that seemed both reasonable and impossibly far away given their tight budget. During that week, something unexpected happened at school. Ryan's special education class was working on a project about personal goals and achievements, and Miss Patterson asked each student to share something they were working toward. When it was Ryan's turn, he talked about his piano lessons, about the song he was learning, about how he was going to play real music. He spoke with such enthusiasm and conviction that the classroom fell silent, every student listening to his words. Miss Patterson seized the moment and asked Ryan if he would be willing to demonstrate what he had learned. Ryan hesitated, suddenly shy, but his teacher encouraged him gently. She pulled up a virtual keyboard on the classroom's interactive whiteboard, and Ryan walked to the front of the room. With the entire class watching, he played through a portion of his exercise, using the digital keyboard displayed on the screen. His fingers moved with careful precision, and though the sound quality from the whiteboard speakers was tinny and artificial, the notes were clear and correct. When he finished, something remarkable happened. His classmates applauded. These were students who faced their own challenges and struggles, who understood what it meant to work hard at something that didn't come easily, who recognized genuine achievement when they saw it. Their applause was sincere and enthusiastic, and Ryan's face flushed with pleasure and pride. Miss Patterson praised his progress and told the class that Ryan was a perfect example of what dedication and practice could accomplish. Word of this classroom demonstration spread beyond the special education room. A few teachers who heard about it mentioned it in the staff lounge, and Mrs. Henderson eventually learned of it from a colleague. That afternoon, when Jennifer came to pick up Ryan, Mrs. Henderson was waiting in the hallway. She asked if she could speak with Jennifer privately for a moment, and Jennifer's heart immediately began to race, wondering if this was the moment when the piano teacher would deliver her verdict about continuing the lessons. They stepped into the empty music room, and Mrs. Henderson closed the door gently behind them. She began by saying that she had heard about Ryan's demonstration in his classroom, about how he had played for his peers with confidence and skill. She said that she had been thinking a great deal about Ryan over the past 3 weeks, about his progress, his dedication, and his natural musical ability. Jennifer braced herself, trying to prepare for whatever was coming next, her hands clasped tightly together. Mrs. Henderson's expression was serious, but not unkind, as she explained that teaching Ryan had been different from teaching her other students, requiring her to adapt her methods and be more creative in her approach. She admitted that she had initially agreed to the trial period with significant doubts, unsure whether a child with Down syndrome could truly learn to play piano at a level that would be satisfying and worthwhile. But over these 3 weeks, Ryan had proven something important to her. He had shown that when genuine passion combined with dedicated effort, extraordinary things could happen. Jennifer felt tears beginning to form in her eyes, still uncertain where this conversation was leading. Mrs. Henderson continued, saying that Ryan's perfect pitch was remarkable, that his rhythmic sense was developing well, and that his ability to read music was progressing faster than she had anticipated. More importantly, she said, Ryan possessed something that couldn't be taught, something that many technically proficient musicians never developed. He had a pure love of music, an emotional connection to the sounds he created, a joy in the act of playing that was beautiful to witness. Then Mrs. Henderson said the words Jennifer had been desperately hoping to hear. She wanted to continue teaching Ryan beyond the trial period. She believed he had real potential, and she was willing to commit to working with him for as long as he remained dedicated and continued to progress. She suggested they establish a regular weekly lesson schedule and discuss a fair payment arrangement. Jennifer couldn't hold back her tears any longer, and they flowed freely down her cheeks as she thanked Mrs. Henderson repeatedly, her voice choked with emotion and gratitude. The piano teacher held up her hand gently, much as she had done when Jennifer first asked for the lessons. She explained that she wasn't doing this as a favor or out of charity. She was doing it because Ryan had earned the right to continue, because he had demonstrated that he was a serious student worthy of her time and expertise. She said that she expected the same level of commitment and effort from him that she expected from all her students, and that there would be no lowering of standards or expectations simply because of his diagnosis. Jennifer nodded vigorously, assuring Mrs. Henderson that Ryan would continue to work hard, that they would find a way to get a proper keyboard for home practice, that they would honor the commitment this represented. Mrs. Henderson mentioned that she knew of a music store that sometimes had rental programs for keyboards, which might be more affordable than purchasing one outright. She offered to make some calls and see what options might be available. This kindness, this willingness to go beyond just teaching and actually help solve practical problems, moved Jennifer deeply. When Jennifer told Ryan the news that evening, his reaction was explosive with joy. He jumped up and down, shouted with happiness, and hugged both his parents so tightly that they laughed and hugged him back just as fiercely. Michael's eyes were bright with emotion as he watched his son's unbridled celebration. Whatever reservations he had harbored about the piano lessons had completely dissolved. Seeing Ryan this happy, this confident, this full of purpose made everything worthwhile. The 4th lesson took on special significance as the official beginning of Ryan's ongoing piano education. He arrived prepared, having practiced his assigned song until he could play it smoothly from beginning to end. Mrs. Henderson had him perform the piece for her, and he played it carefully, his tongue poking out slightly in concentration, his fingers finding each note with increasing confidence. When he reached the final note and it rang out clearly in the quiet room, Mrs. Henderson smiled warmly and applauded. She told Ryan that he had officially completed his first piano piece, that this was a milestone he should be proud of. She wrote the date on his sheet music and had him write his name at the top, explaining that this was now part of his personal musical archive, proof of what he had accomplished. Ryan beamed with pride, looking at his name on the sheet music as if it were a diploma or certificate of achievement. Over the following weeks and months, Ryan continued to progress steadily. Mrs. Henderson introduced new concepts gradually, building on the foundation they had established. She taught him about dynamics, about how playing louder or softer could change the emotional quality of music. She introduced him to different time signatures, expanding his rhythmic vocabulary. She worked with him on hand independence, enabling his left and right hands to play increasingly complex patterns simultaneously. The progress wasn't always smooth or linear. There were lessons where Ryan struggled, where concepts didn't click immediately, where frustration threatened to overwhelm his enthusiasm. There were pieces that took weeks to master, requiring patience and persistence that tested his resolve. But through all of these challenges, Mrs. Henderson remained steady and encouraging, always finding ways to break difficult tasks into manageable steps, always celebrating progress even when the ultimate goal seemed distant. Jennifer and Michael had managed to arrange a keyboard rental through the music store Mrs. Henderson had recommended. The monthly cost was significant for their budget, but manageable with some careful planning and small sacrifices. When the keyboard was delivered to their home and set up in Ryan's room, it felt like Christmas morning. Ryan sat down at it and played through every piece he had learned, his face glowing with the joy of finally having a real instrument of his own to practice on. The presence of the keyboard transformed Ryan's practice sessions. He could now hear the actual notes as he played, could work on dynamics and expression, could develop a more authentic feel for the instrument. His progress accelerated noticeably, and Mrs. Henderson commented on the improvement in his playing. The muscle memory and finger strength he was developing on the real keyboard translated into more confident and controlled performances during lessons. At school, Ryan's growing piano skills became more widely known. Some students remained dismissive or mocking, unable or unwilling to see past their prejudices. But others became genuinely interested and impressed. A few kids from his special education class asked if he could teach them some simple things, and Ryan found himself in the unexpected role of sharing his knowledge, showing other students how to find middle C or how to read basic notes on a staff. One afternoon, during a school assembly, the principal announced that they would be having a talent show in 2 months. Students who wished to participate could sign up to perform any talent they wanted to showcase, whether it was singing, dancing, comedy, or playing an instrument. Jennifer's first thought was that this could be a wonderful opportunity for Ryan, but she immediately worried about the potential for humiliation if he performed and other students mocked him, or if his performance didn't go well. That evening at dinner, Ryan brought up the talent show himself. He said that he wanted to perform, that he wanted to play piano in front of the whole school. Michael and Jennifer exchanged glances, both thinking the same concerns but not wanting to discourage their son. They asked Ryan if he was sure, reminding him that performing in front of a large audience was very different from playing in the music room or at home. Ryan was adamant. He said that he had been practicing for months, that Mrs. Henderson had taught him so much, and that he wanted to show everyone what he could do. Jennifer suggested that they talk to Mrs. Henderson about it first to get her opinion on whether Ryan was ready for such a public performance. Ryan agreed, and at his next lesson they brought up the talent show. Mrs. Henderson listened thoughtfully as Ryan explained his desire to participate. She asked him some questions about why he wanted to perform, whether he understood that he might feel nervous, whether he was prepared to practice extra hard to prepare a performance piece. Ryan answered each question seriously and thoughtfully. He said that he wanted to perform because he was proud of what he had learned, and because he wanted to show the kids who made fun of him that he could do difficult things. He acknowledged that he would probably be nervous but said that he thought he could handle it. He promised that he would practice as much as needed to be ready. Mrs. Henderson studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. She told Ryan that she thought he could be ready to perform by the time of the talent show, but it would require significant work. She would need to help him select an appropriate piece, something that was within his technical abilities but impressive enough to showcase his skills. They would need to work on performance techniques, on how to handle nerves, on how to recover if he made a mistake during the performance. She asked if he was truly committed to putting in this extra effort, and Ryan said yes without hesitation. Mrs. Henderson began incorporating performance preparation into their lessons. She had Ryan play through pieces multiple times without stopping, even if he made mistakes, teaching him to keep going rather than starting over. She worked with him on stage presence, on how to walk to the piano confidently, how to bow to the audience, how to handle applause. She created mock performance situations, having Jennifer sit in the audience while Ryan played, helping him get used to the feeling of being watched. For Ryan's performance piece, Mrs. Henderson selected a simplified arrangement of a classical melody that was recognizable and beautiful. It was more challenging than anything Ryan had attempted before, with both hands playing independent melodic lines, dynamic variations, and some technical passages that would require significant practice. She believed Ryan could master it with dedicated work, and more importantly, she believed the piece would demonstrate his abilities in a way that would command respect. Ryan practiced obsessively. His morning and evening practice sessions extended in duration, and he often asked to practice additional times throughout the day on weekends. Michael and Jennifer could hear the piece slowly taking shape, the initially halting and uncertain notes gradually becoming smoother and more confident. There were setbacks and frustrations, moments when Ryan would make the same mistake repeatedly and have to work through it methodically with his parents' encouragement. At school, news spread that Ryan had signed up for the talent show. The reactions were predictable and hurtful. Some students openly laughed at the idea, saying they couldn't wait to see him mess up in front of everyone. Others made cruel jokes about what kind of terrible noise he would make. A few of the kinder students expressed support, but even they seemed uncertain about whether Ryan could actually pull off a piano performance. The bullying intensified as the talent show approached. The group of older boys who had mocked Ryan before became more aggressive in their taunting. They would make exaggerated gestures of playing piano when they saw him in the hallway, laughing loudly at their own jokes. They told him he was going to embarrass himself, that everyone would laugh at him, that he should withdraw from the talent show before he humiliated his whole family. Ryan came home several times during this period visibly upset, the constant mockery wearing down his confidence. Jennifer and Michael had conversations with school administrators about the bullying, but the reality was that not every incident could be prevented or punished. They focused instead on building Ryan up at home, reminding him of how far he had come, how proud they were of him, how Mrs. Henderson believed in his abilities. Mrs. Henderson herself addressed the situation during one lesson when she noticed Ryan seemed discouraged. She told him a story from her own youth about a piano competition she had entered as a teenager. She had been nervous and uncertain, and some of the other competitors had been dismissive of her because she came from a small town and didn't have the prestigious training they had. But when her turn came to perform, she played with everything she had, pouring her heart into the music, and she had won second place, proving that dedication and passion mattered more than background or pedigree. She told Ryan that every performer faced doubt and criticism, that even the greatest musicians in history had people who didn't believe in them. What mattered was believing in yourself, trusting in your preparation, and having the courage to step onto that stage regardless of what others said. She looked Ryan in the eyes and told him that she believed he was ready, that he had worked hard enough and learned enough to give a performance he could be proud of. Her words rekindled Ryan's determination and gave him the strength to push through the final weeks of preparation. As the talent show approached, the school began holding rehearsals so participants could practice on the stage and with the equipment. Ryan attended his assigned rehearsal time, walking into the auditorium where other students were scattered in seats, waiting for their turns. When Ryan's name was called, he walked onto the stage where a digital piano had been set up. He could hear whispers and snickers from some of the students in the audience, could feel dozens of eyes watching him with skepticism and amusement. He sat down at the digital piano, adjusted the bench just as Mrs. Henderson had taught him, and positioned his hands over the keys. The rehearsal coordinator told him to begin whenever he was ready. Ryan took a deep breath and then he started to play. The opening notes of his piece rang out through the auditorium, clear and confident. As he continued through the piece, the whispers gradually faded. Students who had been looking at their phones or talking to friends began to pay attention. Ryan made it through about halfway through the piece before his nerves got the better of him and his fingers stumbled over a difficult passage. He stopped playing, his face flushing with embarrassment. The rehearsal coordinator called out encouragingly, telling him that was exactly what rehearsal was for, that he should take a breath and continue. Ryan restarted from the section where he had stumbled, and this time he made it through successfully, playing all the way to the end of the piece. When he finished, there was a moment of silence, and then several students began to applaud. It wasn't everyone, and it wasn't thunderous, but it was genuine. Some of the kids who had been most skeptical looked surprised, as if they were reassessing their assumptions. Ryan walked off the stage with his head held high, feeling a mixture of nervousness about the mistake he had made and pride that he had continued and finished the piece. He told Mrs. Henderson about the rehearsal at his next lesson, including the part where he had stopped. She nodded knowingly and explained that this was actually valuable experience. Now he knew what it felt like to make a mistake in front of an audience and to recover from it. She had him practice his piece with intentional mistakes, stopping and restarting from different points, building his confidence in his ability to keep going no matter what happened. This technique helped Ryan feel more prepared and less afraid of potential errors. The night before the talent show, Ryan could barely sleep. He went over the piece in his mind repeatedly, his fingers twitching slightly as if playing the notes on an invisible keyboard. Jennifer checked on him several times, finding him awake and staring at the ceiling. She sat on the edge of his bed and they talked about the next day, about how proud she and his father were regardless of what happened, about how this was already a tremendous accomplishment simply by having the courage to perform. The morning of the talent show arrived with bright sunshine that felt almost symbolic. Ryan got dressed carefully in the nice outfit his parents had selected, a button-down shirt and slacks that made him look mature and professional. He ate breakfast though he didn't have much appetite, his stomach fluttering with nervous anticipation. The family arrived at school early and Mrs. Henderson met them backstage. She had volunteered to be there to support Ryan and help him prepare. The auditorium was filling with students, teachers, and parents. The talent show was a popular event at Lincoln Elementary, drawing a large crowd. Backstage, Ryan could hear the noise of the gathering audience, the excitement and chatter that made everything feel more real and more frightening. Mrs. Henderson sat with him, having him do breathing exercises, reminding him of everything they had practiced, keeping him calm and focused. The talent show began with the principal's welcome and introduction. Various acts performed, each receiving applause and encouragement from the audience. There were singers, dancers, a comedy routine, a student who demonstrated martial arts forms, and several other musical performances on different instruments. Ryan watched from backstage, seeing other students succeed and occasionally make small mistakes that the audience responded to with kindness and support. Finally, the student coordinator came to tell Ryan he was next. Mrs. Henderson gave his shoulder a supportive squeeze and told him to remember everything they had worked on, to play with his heart, and to enjoy this moment he had earned. Jennifer kissed his forehead and whispered that she loved him. Michael gave him a thumbs up and a confident nod. Then Ryan walked toward the stage entrance, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. The principal announced the next performer, reading from her card that Ryan was a fourth grader who would be playing a classical piece on piano. As Ryan walked onto the stage, the auditorium fell quiet. He could see the faces in the audience, some curious, some supportive, some skeptical. He spotted the group of boys who had bullied him sitting together in the middle section, their expressions mocking and expectant. He saw his special education classmates near the front, giving him encouraging smiles and thumbs up. Ryan walked to the piano bench and sat down, just as he had practiced countless times. He adjusted the bench, positioned his hands over the keys, and looked out at the audience one more time. He saw his mother and father standing at the side of the auditorium, their faces full of love and support. He saw Mrs. Henderson in the wings nodding at him with confidence. He took a deep breath and then he began to play. The opening notes floated out into the auditorium, delicate and clear. Ryan's fingers moved across the keys with the muscle memory developed through hundreds of hours of practice. The melody unfolded, his right hand carrying the lyrical line while his left hand provided harmonic support. He focused entirely on the music, on the sounds he was creating, on the expression Mrs. Henderson had helped him develop. As he played, something remarkable happened in the auditorium. The casual chatter and rustling that had accompanied other performances faded away completely. Students who had been skeptical or mocking fell silent, their faces showing genuine surprise. Teachers and parents who had wondered whether this performance would be a disaster began to smile with unexpected delight. The music Ryan was creating was not just technically correct. It was beautiful, filled with emotion and sincerity that transcended technical proficiency. Ryan moved through the piece, navigating the challenging passages he had practiced so diligently. There was one moment where his fingers nearly slipped on a difficult transition, but he caught himself and continued smoothly, just as Mrs. Henderson had taught him. His confidence grew as he progressed through the piece, and he began to truly lose himself in the music, forgetting about the audience, forgetting about his nerves, simply experiencing the joy of playing. As he approached the final section of the piece, Ryan felt a sense of calm certainty. He was going to finish this performance successfully. He was going to prove to everyone, but most importantly to himself, that he could do difficult things, that his dreams were valid, that his efforts mattered. His fingers played the final progression of chords, building to the concluding note that rang out powerfully and then faded into silence. For a moment after the final note, the auditorium was completely quiet. Ryan sat at the piano, his hands still resting on the keys, unsure what to do next. Then the applause began. It started with a few people, and within seconds became a thunderous wave of sound that filled the entire auditorium. Students, teachers, and parents were on their feet, giving Ryan a standing ovation. Some people were wiping tears from their eyes, moved by what they had just witnessed. Ryan stood up from the piano bench and bowed, just as Mrs. Henderson had taught him. The applause continued, even growing louder. He looked out at the audience and saw faces that had mocked him now showing respect and admiration. He saw his classmates from special education jumping up and down with excitement. He saw teachers applauding enthusiastically, some looking shocked at what they had just heard. And he saw his parents both crying openly, their faces radiating pride and joy. As Ryan walked off the stage, the applause followed him. Mrs. Henderson was waiting in the wings, and she pulled him into a hug, telling him that he had been magnificent, that she was so proud of him she could burst. Jennifer and Michael rushed backstage and embraced their son, all three of them crying and laughing at the same time. Ryan felt something he had never quite felt before, a sense of having proven himself in a way that nobody could deny or dismiss. The talent show continued with remaining acts, but the atmosphere had shifted. Ryan's performance had created a moment that transcended entertainment, becoming something more profound. During the closing remarks, the principal specifically mentioned Ryan's performance, saying that it exemplified what the school stood for, that it demonstrated how dedication, support, and belief in oneself could lead to extraordinary achievements. She asked Ryan to stand and take another bow, and once again the audience erupted in applause. In the days following the talent show, everything changed for Ryan at school. Students who had never spoken to him before approached him in hallways to congratulate him on his performance. Some asked questions about how long he had been playing, whether he could teach them piano, what other pieces he knew. Teachers made a point of praising him and using his achievement as an example in their classes when discussing perseverance and hard work. Even the boys who had bullied him most severely seemed chastened by what they had witnessed. They no longer made mocking gestures or cruel comments. A few weeks after the talent show, one of them actually approached Ryan and said, awkwardly but seemingly sincerely, that his piano playing had been really good. It wasn't exactly an apology for the months of mockery, but it was an acknowledgement that they had been wrong about him, and Ryan accepted it with grace. Miss Patterson, Ryan's special education teacher, arranged for him to give a small presentation to his class about his piano journey. Ryan talked about how he had started with a cardboard piano, about how Mrs. Henderson had given him a chance when others doubted him, about how practice and determination had helped him learn to play. His classmates listened with rapt attention, and afterward, several of them said that Ryan's story had inspired them to pursue their own interests and not let other people's doubts stop them. The local newspaper heard about Ryan's talent show performance and sent a reporter to interview him and his family. The resulting article featured a photo of Ryan at his keyboard at home, with a headline about a young boy overcoming challenges to pursue his passion for music. The article quoted Mrs. Henderson, saying that Ryan was one of the most dedicated students she had ever taught, that his perfect pitch and musical sensitivity were remarkable, and that she looked forward to continuing to work with him for years to come. The newspaper article led to unexpected opportunities. A local music store that had heard about Ryan's story donated a better quality digital piano to his family, replacing the rental keyboard with an instrument he could keep permanently. A community organization that supported children with special needs reached out to ask if Ryan would be willing to perform at their annual fundraising gala, offering to pay him a small honorarium for his performance. Jennifer and Michael could hardly believe how dramatically things had shifted. Ryan continued his weekly lessons with Mrs. Henderson, progressing to more advanced pieces and techniques. She entered him in a regional piano competition for young students, a decision that initially worried Jennifer and Michael given their past experiences with Ryan being judged and dismissed. But Mrs. Henderson assured them that this particular competition valued musicality and expression as much as technical perfection, and she believed Ryan would represent himself well. At the competition, Ryan was one of dozens of young pianists performing. He was the only performer with Down syndrome, and once again, Jennifer could see some of the other parents and students looking at him with skepticism and surprise. But when Ryan's turn came to perform, he sat at the grand piano on the competition stage and played the piece he had prepared with the same heartfelt sincerity that had characterized his talent show performance. He didn't win first place in the competition. His technical execution, while impressive given his challenges, wasn't quite at the level of some of the other competitors who had been training intensively for years. But he received an honorable mention, and more importantly, several of the judges made a point of speaking with him and Mrs. Henderson afterward. They praised his musicality, his obvious love of playing, and his emotional connection to the music. One judge, a professor of music at a nearby university, told Jennifer that Ryan had something special that couldn't be taught, and that she should encourage him to continue pursuing music. The months turned into years, and Ryan continued to develop as a pianist. He performed at school concerts, community events, and church gatherings. Each performance built his confidence and skills, transforming him from a shy boy who had been mocked and dismissed into a young musician who commanded respect through his talent and dedication. His piano achievements opened doors in other areas of his life as well, as teachers and peers began to see him as capable and accomplished rather than limited by his diagnosis. Mrs. Henderson continued to teach Ryan throughout his elementary school years and into middle school. Their relationship evolved from simply teacher and student into something more like mentor and protege. She challenged him constantly, never lowering her standards, always believing he could achieve more than he thought possible. Ryan's progress wasn't always smooth, there were plateaus and frustrations, but the foundation of discipline and perseverance he had built carried him through difficult periods. By the time Ryan was in 7th grade, he was playing pieces that would challenge many adult amateur pianists. His repertoire included classical works, contemporary pieces, and arrangements of popular music. He had developed his own small following in the community, with people specifically attending events where they knew he would perform. His story had become something of a local legend, an example that people would cite when discussing the importance of giving everyone opportunities to pursue their passions regardless of perceived limitations. One spring afternoon, Ryan's middle school announced that they would be holding a special assembly to honor students who had demonstrated exceptional achievement in various areas. Ryan was selected to represent the performing arts, and the school asked if he would be willing to give a performance and share some words about his journey. Standing on that stage, now a confident 13-year-old, Ryan played a beautiful piece and then spoke to the assembled students and faculty. He talked about how there had been a time when people mocked him for wanting to play piano, when they said it was too hard for someone like him, when they doubted that he could learn and perform. He said that their doubts had hurt, but that he had found people who believed in him, his parents and Mrs. Henderson, and their belief had given him the courage to keep working even when things were difficult. He told the younger students in the audience that everyone has something they're passionate about, something that makes them feel alive and purposeful, and that they should never let other people's limited vision prevent them from pursuing those passions. The assembly audience listened to Ryan's words in attentive silence, and when he finished speaking, the applause was long and heartfelt. Several students approached him afterward to share their own stories of facing doubts and obstacles, thanking him for his inspirational example. Teachers commented to each other about how remarkable it was that this young man who had once been seen as having limited potential had become one of the most accomplished and respected students in the school. Jennifer and Michael watched their son's continued growth with amazement and profound gratitude. They thought back to that day years ago when Jennifer had nervously approached Mrs. Henderson to ask for piano lessons when they had no idea whether Ryan would be able to learn or how far he might progress. The journey had exceeded their wildest hopes, not just in terms of Ryan's musical development, but in how it had shaped his character, confidence, and place in the world. Mrs. Henderson, now in her late 60s, often reflected on how teaching Ryan had impacted her own life and teaching philosophy. She had been instructing piano for decades, working with hundreds of students, but Ryan stood out as someone special. He had taught her as much as she had taught him, demonstrating that talent and potential could exist in unexpected places, that dedication and heart could overcome significant obstacles, that the true purpose of music was not perfection but expression and connection. As Ryan prepared to enter high school, discussions began about his future. Some people suggested he should consider pursuing music professionally, perhaps as a performer or teacher. Others cautioned that making a career in music was difficult even for musicians without additional challenges, and that Ryan should focus on more practical vocational training. Jennifer and Michael tried to navigate these conversations carefully, wanting to support whatever path Ryan chose without pushing him in any particular direction. Ryan himself had developed a clear sense of what music meant to him. He knew that piano would always be a central part of his life, whether or not it became his profession. The skills he had developed, the confidence he had gained, and the joy he experienced when playing were invaluable regardless of career paths. He had proven to himself and to the world that he was capable of mastering difficult things, of achieving excellence, of contributing beauty and meaning through his talents. The story of the boy with Down syndrome who had been mocked for wanting to play piano, who had silenced his critics with a beautiful performance, had become more than just a personal triumph. It had become a testament to the power of opportunity, dedication, and belief. It demonstrated that every person has potential that might not be immediately visible, that supporting and nurturing that potential can lead to extraordinary outcomes, and that the labels and limitations others place on us need not define what we can achieve. Ryan continued to play piano, to perform, to inspire others with his music and his story. The cardboard piano he had once practiced on was stored carefully in a box in his closet, a reminder of where his journey had begun. Sometimes he would take it out and look at the hand-drawn keys, marveling at how far he had come from those humble beginnings. That simple cardboard had represented a dream that many people thought was impossible, but that had become beautifully, undeniably real. Years later, when Ryan was a young adult, he was invited to speak at a conference for music educators about his experiences learning piano and how Mrs. Henderson's teaching had changed his life. Standing before an audience of teachers from across the country, Ryan shared his story with eloquence and humor, his confidence and communication skills having developed tremendously over the years. He played several pieces for the audience, demonstrating the high level of skill he had achieved. During the question and answer session, one teacher asked Ryan what he would say to other young people with disabilities who had dreams that others told them were impossible. Ryan thought for a moment and then answered that dreams aren't about what others think is possible. They're about what speaks to your heart and what you're willing to work for. He said that there would always be people who doubt, who mock, who can't see past their own limited understanding. But there would also be people who believe, who support, who see your potential even when you can't see it yourself. He encouraged the audience of teachers to be those believers, to give every student a chance to pursue their passions, to adapt their teaching methods when necessary, but never to lower their expectations or assume that certain achievements were out of reach. He said that Mrs. Henderson had changed his life not just by teaching him piano, but by treating him as a serious student worthy of her expertise and high standards. That respect and belief had been as important as any technical instruction. Mrs. Henderson, who had retired from full-time teaching but had come to the conference specifically to see Ryan speak, sat in the audience with tears streaming down her face. Afterward, they embraced, teacher and student, both grateful for the journey they had shared. She told Ryan that teaching him had been one of the great privileges of her career, that watching him develop from that uncertain 9-year-old into the accomplished young man he had become had reaffirmed why she had dedicated her life to music education. The story that had begun with mockery and doubt had evolved into one of triumph, inspiration, and profound human connection. Ryan's piano journey had demonstrated that the greatest limitations we face are often not the ones imposed by our circumstances or conditions, but the ones created by lack of opportunity and belief. When given a chance, supported with patience and high expectations, and met with his own determination and passion, Ryan had achieved something that many had thought impossible. Every time Ryan sat down at a piano and his fingers touched the keys, he carried with him the memory of that first lesson with Mrs. Henderson, the cardboard piano he had practiced on, the talent show performance that had changed everything, and all the people who had supported and believed in him along the way. The music he created was not just notes and rhythms. It was the sound of dreams realized, of obstacles overcome, of a young boy who had been told he couldn't, proving beautifully and undeniably that he could.